It's Thursday, the 28th of May, the year of our Lord 2020. We're live from our nation's capital on a dreary and wet Thursday in late May. Episode 199, now with over 8.5 million downloads, over 100 million views. We're going to talk about all our distribution platforms later in the show. We've got a packed show today. Hong Kong, India, Brazil, manufacturing, high tech, what you're doing to help your life. Over 2 million new people on the unemployment list. We're going to talk about the economy. We're going to talk about capital markets. We're going to talk about the CD, about reopening. But we're going to start. By the way, we got Jack Maxey, Raheem Kassam, Greg Manns, all in studio. We're going to try something new today, remote hosting. We got Jason Miller's going to join us here momentarily. But we're going to start with really the news of the night and what's happening. It's going to change your life. Remember, Austria in 1938. And we're seeing it right now in Hong Kong with the Chinese Communist Party. I want to bring on Mark Simon, Jimmy Lay's partner, and Mark is group director of the company that owns Apple Daily. That is a Chinese-language anti-CCP firebrand newspaper in Hong Kong. Mark Simon is one of the great expatriates that works out of Hong Kong. He's just recently back in the last couple of days. Also, a very close associate of Cardinal Zen. And just a great guy overall. Mark, tell us what's happening. What is the Chinese Communist Party doing to Hong Kong, and why is this? We're going to have Jason Miller on as soon as he gets off. Jason was on an exclusive call yesterday with a number of surrogates talking to Secretary of State Pompeo. He's going to have a report of the details of the Pompeo talk. Why is this such a big deal, and why is this important for Americans?
Well, this is a continued move by the Communist Chinese Party to basically blow apart what we called the Basic Law, the agreement that we had with China, the Brits had with China on how Hong Kong's governed. Really under Xi Jinping, probably starting just after he arrived, we saw further pressure on Hong Kong. Basically, this is a war of values. Hong Kong is a really Western city in a lot of ways. Of course, we don't have full democracy, but we have everything else other than full democracy. And we have all the institutions of a democratic society. We have rule of law. We have free trade. We have open markets, non-discriminatory laws, all types of the good things, and until recently, a pretty good police force. The communists have basically decided that's not going to be the way they want to move forward. They tried last year in 2019 to put in what we called an extradition law, and this would have been the law where basically if you did something in China or they felt you insulted China or you did anything, they could have you extradited from Hong Kong. Well, magically, the business community in Hong Kong wasn't crazy about that because that would have opened them to blackmail and everything, and that's where you saw the protests start last year. And essentially the protest became incredibly large, incredibly effective, and we beat back the extradition law. What that earned us was basically the Chinese Communist Party deciding enough's enough. We're taking over. We're tired of this incompetent Hong Kong government, which is really their opinion of Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, and her cronies. And we're going to ram through the New People's Congress a national security law. And that's what they did these past couple of days. And by doing that, they basically, when they pass these laws, you don't actually see the bill. What they say is, we'll have a bill to you in 35, 40 days, and that'll be the law. But we know what's going to be in it. And essentially, it's going to be the destruction of Hong Kong. There's going to be political crimes, subversion. Even the other day when my boss was tweeting, a state mouthpiece, the Global Times, said that's subversion. If the Global Times says it's subversion, you can bet you're going to be charged with subversion.
Look, here's the important point, is that this started about a year ago on this extradition. They wanted the ability to go in the dark of night, take anybody to Hong Kong, and go throw them in a prison in China. That wasn't the deal. This deal was basically negotiated for years, agreed to in, 1992, transferred, went over in 97. It was a Sino-British deal, but you actually passed legislation here in the United States to make sure it was approved, and we would kind of oversee it with the British. How can you have any deal with the Chinese? How can you have a trade deal? How can you have an intellectual property deal? How can you have some negotiations on these islands in the South China Sea? How can you have anything when the most important deal they had didn't deal with capital markets, didn't deal with material goods, didn't deal with trade or cash? It dealt with human beings. There's 7 million people on Hong Kong. You know, a lot of them are were British subjects, had British passports. But everybody there was free. You had limited democracy, but at least you had democracy. The deal was 50 years, and that was solid. And Prince Charles said when he left that night on the Queen's yacht, he looked back and he said his heart went out for Martin Lee and others that had negotiated the deal with the Chinese Communist Party, because now he felt he was leaving them to the good graces of some of the most evil people on earth. What they did is they did not want to see these young kids, these kids in the streets of Hong Kong last year that were tear gassed, shot with rubber bullets, hit with water cannons, are the patriots of 1775. These are the Patrick Henrys, the Sam Adams. These are the Paul Reveres. These are the people that would not back down to a totalitarian dictatorship and showed the entire world. And people like Cardinal Zen, who I think is the holiest guy in the world, he was sitting there going, you must stop these monsters. And then yesterday, at our last couple of days, out of nowhere, they've just said, hey, guess what? We don't care what the United States has to say. We don't care what the British have to say. We don't care what the EU has to say. And we particularly don't care what Donald Trump has to say. This is our territory, and we're going to put in the laws. We're going to start with this national security law to define sedition. And sedition's essentially anything that we don't like. And you're not going to have trial by jury. You're not going to have any rights. You're not going to, there's no thing about habeas corpus. If we don't like it, we're going to take you and throw you in a dark prison. And if Jimmy Lai starts tweeting, the Global Times, the one that's made me public enemy number one in CCP, I'm honored to say, right? They say Jimmy Lai, that's sedition. That's subversion, right? Right off the bat. So, Mark, tell me what has to happen. If the West does not stand up to this, this is Czechoslovakia in 1938. The Chinese Communist Party is calling the bluff of the West. They say, you like Hong Kong? Hong Kong's a big capital market. People make a lot of money there. The Brits used to run around and own it. Hey, guess what? It's ours. And if you don't like it, that's your problem, because we're doing it. Mr. Mark Simon.
I don't think there's really any hope that the Chinese Communist Party at this point in time has any intention of appeasing the West. I think they're on a full-scale assault, whether you look in the South China Sea, whether you look especially in their United Front operations across the world, which do not get enough attention, whether you look at anything that they're doing. They've got over close to 1 million Uyghurs locked up in the west of China. Look, this is an aggressive, totalitarian regime. Hong Kong is really not their first step. The Uyghurs out west were their really, I would consider, first big one in terms of domestic, culling the domestic troublemakers. But the fact of the matter is, what they're saying is there will be no Western values in our country, China. And for that matter, we don't want any Western values promoted in Asia. I do not see really at this point in time how any type of agreements can move forward with China. Do you scuttle them all now? I'm not so sure about that. But certainly there has to start being a division between the West and the East. I think the other thing that has to happen is all the panda huggers, all the pro-engagement people, the business community, basically they're just going to have to, we're going to have to start saying to them, look, you're now siding with the enemy. In other words, these guys have declared themselves the enemy. For the case of Hong Kong, I think what the U.S. has to do there first is basically start looking at some sanctions. I'm not a fan of blowing apart the Hong Kong special economic relationship because I think that works for the Chinese. I think, in other words, they'd be almost perfectly happy to have it happen, turn around to the Hong Kong people and say, look who abandoned you, look who walked away from you. And I also think, to be honest with you, it's quite a good stick to poke them with. In other words, I think we can make some modifications, we can make some adjustments, and that are just uncomfortable for them. And if they continue to go down that route, well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, they will lose Hong Kong as an international financial center. And let's be very clear, it's the recognition from the United States that makes them an international financial center. The day we decide that they are not any longer, well, you can kiss the banks goodbye. You can kiss everybody moving out of there, because once the U.S. says no SWIFT codes, once the U.S. basically says we don't trust any of your books or anything like that, officially at least, it becomes very difficult for them. The other things that I think we really need to consider is go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead and finish that, because I want to bring Jimmy Lai's
No,
voice.
I think the other things we need to consider is, I think we need to really consider, and we need to basically move outside of what we would look at as the trade world. I think we need to look at the families of CCP officials. Why are they coming to the United States? Why are their children in school here? I think we need to understand, why do we have, the administration made a great move the other day. If you're connected with the military, you're out of certain programs. I want to know.
I think we've lost
Mark. Honest with you.
Mark, hang on for 1 second. I think we've lost you. I want to read Jimmy Lai's tweets. Let's get to it.
He went in a keyword. Okay, here's some Jimmy Lai tweets. They're very important. The most effective sanction you can impose is to freeze Chinese officials' bank accounts in the United States. Expose how corrupted they are. Your actions will be much appreciated, not only by Hong Kongers, but also the Chinese who are oppressed by the CCP and every soul aspiring to be free. He also has some other amazing ones I'll get to. He says, Hong Kong is like Berlin of the last Cold War. If Hong Kong falls for lack of U.S. actions against China, Taiwan will follow, and so will all the U.S. interests in Asia. It is the right time to take action on China as it is facing its worst economic downturn.
Slow down, and I want to reread that one, and I want to read it slowly. This is the key point.
Hong Kong is like Berlin of the last Cold War. If Hong Kong falls for lack of U.S. actions against China, Taiwan will follow, and so will all the U.S. interests in Asia. It is the right time to take actions on China as it is facing its worst economic downturn.
This is the Pacific century. This is an Asian century, and America is an Asian power, and we have our allies. We're going to have the whole second hour of the show. We're going to have Jay Kansawa in here, Dave Ramaswamy, talk about India, talk about how it affects your life, your personal life. We've got Dan D'Amico on manufacturing. We're going to Michael Horowitz on the firewall. We're going to talk about all of the elements of this. The reason this is a big deal, Jimmy Lai was on 60 Minutes back in the fall when they talked about the protest, these millions of kids that showed up every day relentless, and Jimmy Lai, who's one of the most respected guys in Hong Kong, and Mark Simon, who we lost technically, as you guys know this, the Skype is for everybody is dicey. Jimmy Lai broke down and started crying. He said, hey, my generation that signed the deal and agreed to the deal did not force the CCP as they kept encroaching, and we let down these young people. This is this generational divide, the OK Boomer. This is this article Jeremy Peters has about the fourth turning in the New York Times, just saying, right? This is a generational divide. It's these young people are not going to back down. They're China's greatest generation, and they are not going to back down. They're not going to take this. Here's what's going to happen. If we do not stand, I disagree with Mark, we have to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party in Hong Kong, because if we don't, Taiwan's next, then the South China Sea, they're going to lock down, Korea, Japan, they're going to push the United States of America out of Asia and leave our allies like Australia and India singing their tune. We're going to take a short commercial break, be back. Jason Miller's going to tell you what Mike Pompeo said. Then we're going to get into big tech, how it affects your life. Next, War Room Pandemic.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to War Room Pandemic. We just finished the Hong Kong section with Mark Simon. The one thing, Mark Simon, the takeaway from that is Mark Simon saying, hey, we want the West to stand up, and Jimmy Lai sitting there, we need action from the West, but we don't want too much action. We don't want you to mess with the underlying trade arrangement. Now, look, I co-founded the new Rejuvenated with Frank Gaffney and Brian Kennedy and Kyle Bass and others, Kevin Freeman, the Committee on the Present Danger. We went in hard, as you can imagine, yesterday. 12. Shut it down. The whole thing. Bring it all down. Because you've got to stop the ability of the Chinese Communist Party to access global capital through Hong Kong. Here's why. We have to smoke them out right now. Because here's what they're going to tell you. They're going to say, okay, Trump, you're going to take our trade agreement away? You're going to sanction us? You're going to sanction individuals? You're going to pull our visas? You're going to maybe start stripping some assets, take some assets? You're going to limit capital? You're going to break the exchange rate with the Hong Kong dollar? You're going to do it all. And we don't care. It's more important for us right now as a Chinese Communist Party to stop the view of democracy. Those kids in the street are the worst thing we got going, because kids in this mainland are looking at that and saying, look what these guys are fighting for. In Taiwan, because of the pandemic, what happened on the 31st of December of 2019, as Mr. Jack Maxey has brought up many times, and he's the guy who dug it up, the CDC of Taiwan notified the World Health Organization that there was a SARS-like virus that had broken out in central China, and it had, guess what? Human-to-human transmission and community spread. If Dr. Tedros and the running dogs in the World Health Organization in Geneva had acted upon that, there wouldn't be 100,000 Americans dead today. We wouldn't have, somebody did an analysis last night and showed me, the world GDP is going to drop $1 trillion this year after we've hit $20 trillion combined from the central banks and the governments. Financial Times, big, huge article today about the EU is going to step in. $20 trillion cash infusion, $1 trillion dump in GDP. And trust me, folks, that $20 trillion could have gone to make the world a paradise. What it's doing is holding us in place, okay? Because Taiwan showed us that in December of 2019. And the CCP can't allow that to exist anymore. The example of Chinese people who are free is something that they can't afford to have exist. So it's Hong Kong now. It's Taiwan next. It's the South China Sea, which they think is an internal lake to China. And when they block that off, Korea and Japan fall like ripened fruit. Okay? And then we've got Australia, which is carved off, in India. And the United States is pushed out of Asia for the first time in 150 or 200 years. The 21st century is the Asian century. And the United States is an Asian and Pacific power. And we have allies. We're pushed off of that. Just like people in 1938, when guys would tell them about it, say, hey, Czechoslovakia's got nothing to do with me. I live in Kansas. I live in Iowa. I live in Ohio. What do I care about Austria? What do I care about Czechoslovakia? 3.5 years after, maybe 4 years, about 3.5 years after Austria, in Munich, in Czechoslovakia, and all of it, American kids were landing in North Africa, okay, and then Sicily, and then Italy, and then Normandy, in Guadalcanal, in Wake Island, in Midway, in all of it, the Coral Sea. It's coming. If we don't stop them now, all of that's going to happen. You're going to have a replay, and here's why. This is the unfinished work of the 20th century. This is the last group of big gangsters, okay? Just like Mussolini, just like Hitler, right? Just like the Soviets. This is the last group. Now, we cut a deal with them in the 70s to take down our other enemy, the Soviets. Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Soviets, Joseph Stalin was our partner to take down Hitler and Mussolini. Now it's time for the confrontation, and it's here. And their signal, we're going to get Jason Miller, our co-host, is going to get on. He was on this call with Mike Pompeo yesterday. I think I disagree with Tom Friedman. I think Mike Pompeo is a brilliant Secretary of State. We're going to get the inside scoop of Mike Pompeo. But the big takeaway, I believe, and this, we got to smoke them out, the CCP saying, hey, we don't care. We're going to hunker down in China and on the Eurasian landmass with Pakistan and Iran and Turkey and Russia. We're going to consolidate this, and we don't care if was that Jack Maxey? That was, no, just teasing. Our co-host, we don't care. We don't care if our growth is 2% versus 8%. We don't need the West. We've decoupled technologically, and now we're going to decouple from the capital markets. And we're going to decouple from the American market. Hey, guess what? Yeah, we can get 10% growth or 12% growth if we're in America, but guess what? It's not as important as shutting down democracy and freedom in Hong Kong and Taiwan and Singapore and all of it. Korea, Japan, the whole deal. Because it's coming. Jason Miller, you were there with Mike Pompeo yesterday in this call. Walk us through what Secretary Pompeo said.
Yeah, Steve and team, it was pretty powerful what Secretary Pompeo had to say yesterday. And he was doing a bit of a briefing call and overview of what's going on with Hong Kong and spoke very specifically to this removing the trade status of Hong Kong. He did say that this is part of an annual review. And so the timing of this does come up right when we're seeing all these violations of human rights and China taking over Hong Kong. But he also made clear that he's in communication with a number of other world leaders. He said Dominic Raab from the UK, mentioned a number of other leaders around the world. So this isn't happening in a complete vacuum. But he called out the CCP in very specific ways. And he went through and said, look, the Chinese government's behavior has to change if we're going to look at things differently. They can't be violating human rights. They can't be violating the trade agreements. They can't be stealing our intellectual property. They can't be weaponizing. He said this is places where they've broken their trust in the past by weaponizing islands in the South China Sea, really calling them out pretty specifically in a way that I hadn't heard in a while. But he also said, and this is a little bit of the buried lead, he said that there are some recommendations that are being put in front of President Trump, said President Trump is reviewing those now, and he inferred, didn't really announce it, but he did infer that there's going to be additional action coming up with regard to Hong Kong and China later. So stay tuned, but this sounds pretty powerful.
Read me the Jimmy Lai about the world's. He had a tweet about they need the world to stand up. Do you have that tweet, Jack?
Let me pull it up.
And let me know when you have it, because this is important. We know President Trump has gone the extra mile to work with the CCP to try to integrate him into the world system. What does Jimmy Lai tell us?
CCP imposes the national security law on Hong Kong. World leaders, please show your support to Hong Kong by taking concrete actions. Words alone cannot change the mind of the dictator Xi Jinping.
Jason, you remember this, and President Trump said it in the State of the Union. This is the reason he's president of the United States. The managed decline of our country by our elites, most epitomized by the relationship with China and the Chinese Communist Party. Dan D'Amico is going to be on at the top of the hour to talk about manufacturing. Our entire manufacturing base went away, and now we're awakened to that. The whole American people are awakened to not just healthcare and pharmaceuticals, but the entire thing is sitting there. President Trump has made this a centerpiece, and particularly comparing, contrasting Joe Biden. And people should remember this, and particularly the Bernie people, who, once again, I'm just saying, it was a pillow fight, okay? You guys, if you want to win the presidency, it's a knife fight, not a pillow fight, a knife fight. Hillary Clinton knows how to do that, right? Obama knows how to do that. Donald Trump definitely knows how to do that, okay? It's a knife fight. And you never brought up the entire time. You ran 2 times and never really brought it up. Every now and again, you'd mention it. But mentioning it is not making it part of the narrative. Joe Biden is the senator from Wilmington, Delaware. That's the drop box for the globalist corporations, okay? He has been in back of every trade deal. And when President Obama, who had enough on his plate, said, hey, I'm pivoting to Asia. We're getting out of the Middle East. You're going to be my guy. You're my point man. You got nothing else to do except sniffing people's heads and rubbing up on them. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you in charge of the pivot, Joe. Joe from Scranton, you're going to be head of the pivot. So get over there and pivot. Do your magic. And everything he touched is coming back to us today. He's sitting there last night, Jason, I want you to jump in here, saying, oh, I've got a much harder way than Trump's going to do it. I'm going to have something. How can he, with a straight face, do that? The South China Sea, brother, is militarized because of you. You negotiated the deal that was supposed to stop it. You actually had a Rose Garden ceremony, and they militarized it, as Pompeo says, weaponized the islands in the South China Sea, built on the watch of Joe Biden. Mr. Jason Miller, what say you?
Yeah, Steve, and you tie it together perfectly because Joe Biden has been at a front seat for all of these bad policy decisions over the last 40, 50 years. And one of the other items that Secretary Pompeo brought up is he was going through this checklist of all the ways that the CCP has violated our trust, violated our agreements. The other one that he went into, which is obviously why we have a war room pandemic, is the fact that the CCP has failed to report out information dealing with coronavirus. The fact that they covered it up, they didn't live up to their own WHO standards that they're trying to wrap their arms around. And so whether it be the IP theft, the trade agreements, weaponizing the South China Sea, it's very clear that we can't trust the CCP in any way. And until they go and change their behavior, we're going to see a lot more action. So it did look like it was forward leaning from Secretary Pompeo. And Joe Biden, this all goes to you, buddy. Your 25 hours of one-on-one meetings with President Xi, the fact that the plane loads of cash, or figurative plane loads of cash, that Mr. Biden came back with as 1.5 billion investments for his hedge fund that he was working on. And this is going to all come back. So as soon as Joe starts venturing out of this basement bunker of his, he's going to have a lot of answering to do.
Okay, Jason Miller is going to be with us for the next segment. We're going to get into tech. We're also going to talk about CDC new guidance and the opening of America. Hashtag War Room Pandemic. Your observations, your comments, your questions, all of it. Want to hear. Next, we'll be back. War Room Pandemic in just a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen.
The ancient Romans, when they built the strongest republic that had ever existed before the United States of America, had a saying, fortune favors boldness. And remember, in this time of timidity, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to be bold. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you need NetSuite by Oracle. Remember, Oracle is the #1 platform in the world on the cloud. This package of software is a tool to allow you to go through difficult times. They've got this great site. We've got it up on our website. You go to the 7 action steps that you must take to be a successful entrepreneur during this pandemic. Remember, we've got this economic crisis, financial crisis. We're going to get to the other side of this. Today, 2 million people, another 2 million joined the unemployment rolls. That's not going to last forever. And here's what's going to take us out of this: entrepreneurship. If you're an entrepreneur, you want NetSuite by Oracle. Okay, what do we got? Yes, sir.
Some quick breaking news here.
Here's some breaking news.
Looks like the FISA renewal bill has collapsed in the House because of opposition. Just announced just now by the New York Times.
We had some pretty good. Let's get to Matt Gaetz broke some big news yesterday. He told us that he thought this thing would collapse yesterday. He's one of the guys in back of the collapse. Matt Gaetz also says something about big
President's
tech.
comments. The other thing we need to do is reform Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. A lot of listeners will not know that Twitter, Facebook enjoy privileges against lawsuits that this podcast does not enjoy, that your local newspaper does not enjoy, that CNN and Fox News do not enjoy. And they get those because purportedly they are supposed to be unbiased, neutral platforms. But that's inaccurate.
Okay, I want to go to. Okay, what is this? Okay, we broke some news yesterday, Jason Miller. You and Raheem walked me through this. I get confused. I'm a simple guy. I want to break up big tech. Okay, I want to get the antitrust, and they're too big, they're too powerful. They shove people around in this city. They got every lobbyist working for them. These are monsters. They've been able to create and here's what they've done. They did it all with the deplorables money. It was all the pension fund money and the venture capital firms and private equity firms and hedge funds that made Zuckerberg from his dorm room in Harvard, where he stole this essentially. By the way, I wish I had 2:30 so he doesn't have to come after me. But I saw the movie, okay? Jason and Raheem, make sense of this. What was Gates saying? Why is this important? And why is the president of the United States, with everything he's got going on in the world geopolitically, economically, financially with this pandemic, why is Donald J. Trump, the 45th president of the United States, spending a second on this?
I want to bring Jason in on this first to tee up exactly what's going on politically. Then we're going to get into the detail on Section 230. Jason.
Yeah, so what Twitter did here is they went and put a fact check on 2 of President Trump's tweets dealing with the mail-in ballots. And we don't want to get down the rabbit hole on that, but essentially President Trump was right. And what President Trump is against isn't if someone's getting an absentee ballot. President Trump doesn't want to see these ballots just sent out to 160, 180 million people all across the country and just say, hey, here's your ballot, do whatever. I mean, just obviously the logistics of that are crazy, but the fraud, the potential for fraud is just nuts here. So Twitter came through and threw on these fact checks on here. The only other evidence that I've been able to find of a world leader being censored like this is apparently Twitter took down a couple of posts of President Bolsonaro in Brazil. That's the only other example that I've been able to find here. But look, politically speaking, is a gift. I don't know why Twitter's picking this fight. I think it plays right into President Trump's hands. And this is another example of the establishment, of the man, of big tech, of left of center media outlets trying to censor and quiet President Trump. And this is part of it I described. I gave this quote to Ryan Nobles at CNN. But one of President Trump's superpowers in all of this is his ability to talk directly to voters, go around traditional media filters where they manipulate your comments or take little snippets and go right to people. But I think this is where Raheem's going to go, is this is a specific effort by Twitter to say, you know what, we realize that you want to talk directly to voters. We're going to try to interfere with that.
Yeah, I think Jason's right in how he represents my side of this, is that Twitter's built this in to they've calculated the potential fallout from what they've done, and they've calculated that actually it's more important to them to swing an election than to have this fight with a White House. And forgive me for the people listening in the White House, I'm a friend, but I'm a critic, that has been relatively slow on this. And I want to...
What do you mean slow?
Well, I'll tell you
something. The President of
something.
the United States has signed an executive order to blow this thing up.
Which should have been signed 3 years ago. The evidence was already there. That big tech had its thumb on the scales in favor of progressive causes. I popped a poll up on my Twitter
last night. Okay, but hang over a second. Hang over a second. And Jason, come back in here. Trump would not be president of the United States if he did not have that field army that was tied together by social media, because he didn't have any cash, didn't have any money. So you had all these guys on Facebook, on Twitter. There was a whole movement that Trump came into, and then Trump took it to the next level. So how can you sit there and say that the big tech was against Trump or tried to thwart him? They're like Morning Joe. They basically provided him a platform to essentially compete in a process that he shouldn't be able to compete in.
Well, I mean, he provided himself the platform. All right, he
didn't build Twitter. He didn't build Facebook. That's just not correct. Those platforms were built by the tech companies. President Trump just was savvy enough with the Cernoviches of the world and all these other people, all these other, and you were one of them. And hey, Breitbart, we built. Hey, guess what? The reason they shut us down at first was that we built we gamed the system on Facebook and knew how to use Facebook to build traffic, right? Using Facebook's rules.
Okay, Jack Dorsey, can I speak?
Okay, fine. Okay, Boomer.
Look.
Is that Jack Dorsey's argument? Is that Jack Dorsey's argument?
No, I'm saying you're shutting me down here.
Oh, okay.
But listen.
Can we fact check Raheem in real time?
There's no doubt that what you're saying about President Trump utilizing the platform effectively is true. But remember in the immediate aftermath of the election, when the Googles came together and Twitter, and they had their little town halls out in Silicon Valley, and they said, we should have done more to stop this. There were moments...
And we have to stop it in the future.
And they put plans together in place. And at that moment, when that evidence, remember, we had the tapes. It's still out there. The video exists. As soon as they said that, there should have been executive orders in place to stop the tech monopoly, and that word is very important, for doing anything more. But they dithered, the White House dithered, and President Trump has really let down a lot of the base that's been talking about this for so long. Now, people are welcoming the fact that there's an executive order coming today, but I asked the question on my Twitter last night, quote, are you expecting that there will be much substance in President Trump's executive order on social media, or do you think it's going to be posturing or positioning? 42% said substance, 58%, that's of 3,000 voters, said positioning or posturing. And that's because this debate is actually had out every day on social media.
Jason, jump in here, but correct me if I'm wrong. They did this by using artificial intelligence. I have said for a while, it doesn't feel like 16 because you don't feel the heat and the fire you used to feel in 16. People have told me it's because the big platforms have used artificial intelligence to take down many of the voices or suppress the voices. But the president had in the East Room, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 or 5 months ago. It was in the fall during impeachment. He had all of the people, all the leading influencers and voices.
Yeah, I was there.
Didn't that start this movement? You're saying he waited now. What did they do back then?
The movement existed before. What that was effectively, and I hate to say it, a bit of a sop to the MAGA online base to say, hey, we're listening. There's a meme now that goes around. President Trump is monitoring the situation because that's what the White House said at the time. And I don't want to detract from any positives coming out of today. It is a good thing that this is now going into an executive order. But what is going into this executive order? CNN says, and what we're looking at is an attack on Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. I've been talking about this for years. Title 47, Telecommunications, Chapter 5, Wire radio communication, common carrier regulation, Section 230. And what does it say? It says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Effectively, what they're saying is that these platforms are protected against being classed as publishers. So the responsibilities that we have on this show to be accurate, to not defame people, to not have lawsuits, which you know I love, leveled at us, the same ones that the New York Times has, these platforms don't have them, regardless as to whether or not they editorialize. Now, we were talking about this years ago because you'll remember back in our Breitbart days, they used to editorialize their Facebook trends feed. Every time an article that we wrote was rising up the trends, somebody would come in and manually squash it down. That's editorializing. And the same thing applies with Twitter's new fact-checking thing. The fact-checking thing, by the way, which even Business Insider, hardly a populist nationalist outlet, popped a story 21 hours ago, and the headline was, Twitter tried to correct Trump's falsehoods about vote by mail, but the platform's first fact check on the president's tweets itself was misleading. And it was misleading.
Jason, do you think that Facebook and Twitter have been successful to date in suppressing the fire and the intensity of the Trump movement online?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can see it. I mean, the way the algorithms have changed everything. I mean, you can't go through Twitter without people saying, wait a minute, why did I all of a sudden lose 1,000 followers? Or how come I don't see this person's tweets anymore? I mean, there are a number of friends that I have that are mega supporters or right of center allies that I'll never see their tweets unless I go to their actual Twitter stream to go and look through it. And it's definitely manipulating when people see things and how they see things. But where they cross that line from being a platform to becoming a publisher is when they went and censored President Trump. And again, this isn't accident that this is happening in an election year. That's what people need to wake up and make sure that they realize. They're ticked off. I think Raheem did an excellent job of describing how they're frustrated and mad that they allowed President Trump to use their platform than human history ever has. They want to make sure it doesn't happen again in 2020. That's what this is all about. There are no coincidences in politics.
We have to be very clear that Section 230 is just the start of this, because what stripping Section 230 means, effectively, is that anyone can actually sue these people now for taking those actions. Well, that's all right if you've got the resources and the time to sue. It's like suing 10 New York Times all smushed into one together. But just to complete this, the next thing we have to talk about is social media as a public utility. This is the public square. They have created a public square. They use monopolistic practices to keep it a public square. You look at somebody like my friend Laura Loomer, who's running for Congress, who is banned from all these social media platforms. If the president wants to take real action and revenge against these social media platforms, one of the best things he can do is come out and endorse Laura Loomer, because she is indicative of exactly how they can knock you off every single platform, even when you're running for public office.
Well, here's something that Jack Dorsey tweeted last night in response to this controversy, and to me it sounds like Jack Dorsey is admitting it. It sounds like he wants a fight. This is what he writes. Fact check. There is someone ultimately accountable for our actions as a company, and that's me. Please leave our employees out of this. We'll continue to point out incorrect or disputed information about elections globally and we will admit to it and own any mistake we make. Time to take these people down, I think, Raheem.
And that goes precisely to Bobby Schilling's op-ed in the Daily Caller yesterday that I mentioned on air here yesterday, where he said we need to know who the watchmen are. Jack was listening. Jack Dorsey was listening. He says, please leave our employees out of this. No. If your employees are pushing that button, if your employees are putting their finger on the scales of the most important election that's going on this year in the world, then we want to know who they are, who they've donated to, and what their political
You mean
affiliations
his
are.
editors.
His editors. Thank you, Jack.
Okay, we're going to take a...
Hey, guys,
Yep,
I want to make an
yep,
important point here.
yep.
I got to make super. Imagine if you took that Glenn Kessler guy from the Washington Post. What if Twitter went and hired him away from the Washington Post and had him go through and do his censoring or quote unquote fact checking for every single tweet from President Trump? It could go that direction. That's why this is such a big deal.
For Pinocchios, we're going to turn in a second. Finish up tech, go to CDC next.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Crisis means risk plus opportunity, and entrepreneurs know what risk is. You got to know how to mitigate it. Remember, fortune favors the boldness. We're now sponsored by NetSuite by Oracle. It's the world's #1 cloud business system. They've got a tremendous tool out there for you, the NetSuite package. What you need to do is to go to netsuite.com/Bannon. That's up on our website. Just go to the website. You'll see it right there at the top. Go. You take a tour. They walk through the 7 things as an entrepreneur you got to be thinking about today that the NetSuite package of software can help you with. And what is that specifically? It's things like your forecasting, your economics, the underlying human resources issues you've got, your assets, all of it. Everything you need to do to kind of bridge the chasm of this pandemic and the economic inferno around it. Remember, people are going to build tremendous businesses over the next couple of years. Why don't you be one? This software package of NetSuite is perfect for any entrepreneur, whether your sales are $1 million or $100 million or anything in between, or even if you're just thinking of starting up. So go to our site, go online, talk to a NetSuite representative. Get in the game. Fortune favors boldness. NetSuite by Oracle. Okay, I want to turn to now Raheem Ghassan. We got some cleanup to do on tech, and then Jason Miller is going to walk us through the CDC's new guidance.
I just want to finish with the turbulent priests at the National Pulse are at it again. We've got a story as the lead on the site. Twitter hires Chinese Communist Party linked AI expert who wanted to hide secret weapons contracts. Now, that sounds like a crazy, right-wing conspiracy headline. And I just...
Breitbart at its height.
And I balked on writing it, and I thought, no, but it's all true. So I have to write it the way that it's just true. So Dr. Fei Li, Stanford professor, former Google vice president, who's been out to Beijing to speak at Chinese communist-sponsored conferences, and now this is according to Radio Free Asia, the Epoch Times. It's a very well-sourced story that we've put all the bits and pieces together on this, and added exclusive reporting in here as well. This is somebody who, when working for Google's China arm, really heading it up, was also caught in leaked emails saying we don't want the press to get wind of our DoD contracts in the United States because they might be curious about why we were doing AI weapons programs. This is who Twitter has thought it smart to put on its board as an independent advisor in recent months. And when you go through this story, and we lay it out quite frankly, and I'll say quite honestly, I've had some friends of Dr. Fei-Fei's come to me in the last 24 hours saying, oh, she might just be playing both sides and she's not really with the CCP or anything like that. But when you go through the detail of this story on the National Pulse, you will see not only does she have a significant history of working with hardline anti-American organizations and entities, such as the Daisy and Paul Soros organization, all the way back to 1999, but also has a history of these things going on with Google's China AI Center, how it works in tandem with the CCP, the conferences that she's attended. And one of the quotes that I want to leave you with that really frightened me when she was speaking at a 2017 event, She called China the sleeping lion that has been awakened and said, "Today, my team and I return to China, hoping to start a long and sincere work to create the future. AI has no national boundaries. AI's benefits has no boundaries."
Jason, we're going to get to the CDC. We're going to figure out, Vish, how to get Jason into the next hour. We got to get to the CDC issue. I got to stay on this. This is if it was not, and Jason, the question I'm going to put to you, if it was not for how Trump triggers the left and triggers the mainstream media, if they did not have Trump derangement syndrome, wouldn't this be an issue that you would see both populists and nationalists on the right and civil libertarians, the Rand Paul crowd, plus those civil libertarians on the left, wouldn't they be coming together to saying, what is going on here with these big tech companies? They got too much power. There's too much concentration of power. It's too much concentration of wealth. They're doing things like we have no earthly idea what they're doing with artificial intelligence inside these platforms with your data. So, Jason, if it was not for Trump, wouldn't this be something that would actually pull the country together? And the only thing that's not allowing that is the Trump derangement syndrome, that the left thinks that this is the way that Trump got to office in 2016 and how he'll get reelected in 2020?
You're absolutely right. And again, it's the tech folks working with the media folks hand in hand in this. And I think that's important because the media is giving them cover and essentially saying that everything they're doing is fine. Well, of course, we're going to fact check President Trump with the way that we view the facts. Of course, we're going to go try to censor him. We really hate it when, of course, say the CCP kicks out journalists out of Beijing. Of course, we're upset about that. Of course, we're upset about any other possible censoring. When it comes to President Trump, it's okay. He's a bad guy. We have TDS. Don't worry about it. So you're exactly right, Steve. I mean, this is something where are the Bernie bros at? Where are the people who realize that the next president could get censored, or look at all the folks in places around the world where their human rights are being violated, their freedoms are being taken away. We really hate it when they're being censored. Why do we hate it when President Trump is, or why aren't they having the same reaction here?
I'll jump in here, guys, but this concept of artificial intelligence and the lack of control of artificial intelligence, remember, it's coming out of places like DARPA. It's coming out of the defense sector. Well, look, I'm a huge national security guy, but you've got things going on in China. You've got things going on. We have no earthly idea what people are implementing in these companies that are publicly traded with pension fund money on artificial intelligence. So, Raheem, what should be the program going forward?
Well, again, I think we have to look at the public square argument and the monopoly argument, because let's not forget that a lot of these tech firms also rely on government contracts. Some of their biggest revenue streams are from these government contracts. So to dismiss the sort of conservative Inc. argument outright, these aren't private free market companies operating independently and therefore they can kick you off or do whatever with AI that they want to do. This is taxpayer money that is being funneled en masse into these companies that censor us and that are doing things in this field with stated enemies of the United States of America, and we're just allowing it to happen.
Okay, we're going to take a short commercial break. I tell you what, let's try to get Dan D'Amico or bring Jason back in the hour. Jason, I'm going to bring you back later in the next hour to talk about CDC. Jason Miller, who said, hey, the CDC guidance is not that specific. Guess what? They answered his call. They got very specific guidance on how to open up the country. We're going to return to that. Got Dan D'Amico about manufacturing. We have Michael Horowitz on the firewall, Jay Kansara, Dave Ramaswamy on India. All next hour with Elizabeth Yore on China on War Room Pandemic.